I used to believe grief made people gentler. That losing someone you loved stripped away pride and performance and left only something honest behind. I was wrong. The funeral home in Charleston smelled like lilies and polished wood. The air felt thick, like it was holding its breath. My mother lay in the open casket at the front of the chapel, her hands folded neatly over the pale blue dress she had chosen years ago just in case. Church friends filled the pews. Marina employees stood along the back wall. My father sat in the front row, rigid and hollow-eyed. I felt Victoria before I saw her. The sharp rhythm of her heels crossed the marble floor. She stepped into my line of sight just as I leaned down to adjust the edge of my mother's blanket. Then she slapped me. The sound cracked through the chapel. Not loud in volume, but loud in meaning. My head snapped to the side. My cheek burned instantly. Someone gasped. A cousin whispered my name. No one moved. "You're only here for the inheritance," Victoria said, her voice steady enough to carry. "Don't pretend you care." I did not touch my face. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself. I just looked at her. She thought I was silent because I was ashamed. She had no idea the lawyer was already in the room. The silence that followed wasn't soft. It was brittle. People shifted in their seats, unsure whether to step in or step back. My father stood halfway, then stopped. Like he couldn't decide which daughter required his loyalty. Victoria held my gaze for another second, then turned deliberately toward the pews, smoothing the front of her navy dress as if she had merely adjusted something out of place. "I won't let her turn this into drama," she said to no one and everyone. Mom deserved better. Mom deserved better. The words hovered in the air between us. I stepped back from the casket. My cheek throbbed. But I kept my hands clasped in front of me. Years of experience had taught me something simple. If I reacted, I became the story. If I stayed still, the room had to sit with what they had just seen. Thomas Whitmore, the estate attorney, stood near the back of the chapel beside the organ. He wasn't part of the church. He wasn't part of our family. He was there because my mother had insisted on it. He didn't look surprised. The service resumed awkwardly. The pastor cleared his throat and spoke about forgiveness and eternal rest. Victoria returned to her seat beside my father and took his hand, her profile composed and grief-stricken in all the right ways. From where I stood, I could see the side of her face, not a tear. After the burial at the small family plot overlooking the marsh, everyone gathered in the reception hall next door. Casseroles lined folding tables. Sweet tea sweated in plastic pitchers. The Marina board members stood in a tight cluster near the windows, speaking in low voices. Victoria moved through the room like she was hosting a fundraiser. She touched arms, nodded solemnly, accepted condolences as if they belonged to her alone. I caught fragments of conversation. She handled everything during Margaret's illness. Such a strong daughter. Brooke lives so far away. Doesn't she? I lived 3 hours north in Charlotte. I worked in public relations. I drove down every other weekend once Mom's diagnosis turned serious. But that didn't fit the version Victoria was offering. She found me near the hallway leading to the restrooms, away from the hum of the crowd. "Don't embarrass yourself tomorrow," she said quietly. "Embarrass myself how? By contesting the will, by making accusations. It's done. Brooke? Everything's finalized." There was something else beneath her confidence. Not grief, not anger. Urgency. "I'm not here to fight," I said evenly. She gave a small, dismissive smile. "Good. Because Mom trusted me to handle things. You always get emotional when you feel left out." Left out. That word had followed me my entire life. 6 weeks earlier, I had been sitting beside my mother's hospital bed when she asked Victoria to step into the hallway. The machines had hummed softly around us. Mom's voice was thin but sharp. "When the lawyer speaks," she had whispered, squeezing my hand. "You don't interrupt. Let the paperwork speak." I hadn't understood then. I did now. Victoria leaned closer. "By tomorrow morning, everything will be settled. I suggest you accept that." She walked away before I could respond. already turning toward one of the marina board members with a sympathetic tilt of her head. "Everything will be settled." The phrase echoed in my mind as the afternoon light faded through the reception hall windows. Settled for whom? As guests began to leave, I noticed Whitmore speaking quietly with Linda Carver near the door. Linda had been our family's longtime attorney before Victoria replaced her 3 months ago. I had thought it was routine at the time. Now I wasn't so sure. Victoria caught me looking in their direction. "You didn't think I'd leave anything unfinished, did you?" she said. There it was again. Not sorrow. Strategy. I stepped outside into the cooling evening air. The marsh grass bent gently in the breeze. In the distance, I could see the outline of Daniel's marina, the docks stretching into the water like ribs. That marina wasn't just property. My grandfather built it plank by plank. My mother kept it afloat after he died. It paid for my college tuition. It paid for Victoria's financial certification courses. It held our name. The slap hadn't been about emotion. It had been about intimidation. Victoria wanted me destabilized before the will reading. She wanted the room primed to see me as volatile, greedy, unpredictable. She believed tomorrow would confirm her control. She didn't know my mother had prepared for more than a funeral. And tomorrow morning, at 9 o'clock, inside Whitmore and Hayes, the room would belong to structure, not performance. For the first time all day, I felt something steadier than grief. I felt ready. I woke up in my childhood bedroom with the taste of lilies still clinging to the back of my throat. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. Then the ceiling fan came into focus. The faint crack in the plaster above the closet door. The framed photo of Victoria and me at the marina when we were kids. My cheek still felt warm where her hand had struck me. Not swollen, just tender enough to remind me it hadn't been imagined. Downstairs, I heard her voice before I heard my father's. Calm, measured, low enough to sound intimate, high enough to carry through the kitchen. I showered, dressed in black slacks and a simple blouse, and went down slowly. The house smelled like coffee and something reheated in the oven. The kind of ordinary morning scent that pretended yesterday hadn't happened. Victoria stood at the kitchen island with her phone in one hand and a yellow legal pad in the other. My father sat at the table, staring at his mug as if it had personally disappointed him. They stopped talking when I entered. "There she is," Victoria said softly, like I was a fragile patient. "How are you feeling?" "I'm fine." My father glanced at my face, then away. He didn't ask about the slap. He didn't ask why I had gone quiet in the chapel. He just cleared his throat. "Let's not do this again today," he said. "We need to get through the will reading without more conflict." Conflict. Victoria set her phone down and leaned against the counter. "Brooke got upset yesterday," she said gently. "She accused me of manipulating Mom about the inheritance." I stared at her. I hadn't said that. Not out loud. "She's under a lot of stress." Victoria continued. "She's been emotional." There it was. The word she had used since we were teenagers. Emotional. My father nodded slowly. "This isn't the time to question your sister's integrity." Integrity. Victoria gave him a grateful look, then turned back to me. "Everything was finalized months ago. Mom wanted it that way." "Finalized how?" I asked. "With the trust amendment," she replied smoothly. "The restructuring." I hadn't known there was a restructuring. My father shifted in his chair. "Victoria handled all that. Your mom didn't have the energy." I felt something settle coldly in my stomach. Victoria hadn't just slapped me. She had been positioning herself for months. She picked up the legal pad and flipped a page. "The marina needed flexibility," she said. "You know how the industry's been. It was strategic." "The marina," I repeated. She gave me a look that said I was proving her point. "You don't keep up with these things." 6 weeks earlier, I had been sitting beside my mother in the hospital, the late afternoon sun filtering through thin curtains. Victoria had stepped out to take a call. Mom's fingers had tightened around mine. "There are things you don't know," she had said quietly. "What things?" She hesitated. "Paperwork that doesn't feel right." I had assumed she meant medical forms. Insurance. I hadn't thought about the marina. Back in the kitchen, Victoria's phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced down, and for a split second I saw the preview before the screen dimmed. Make sure she doesn't talk to Whitmore alone. My heart skipped. Victoria locked the screen immediately and slid the phone into her pocket. She smiled at me like nothing had happened. After the reading, everything will be clear, she said. We can move forward? Forward. Who texted you? I asked. She raised one eyebrow. Excuse me. I saw the notification. It's none of your concern. My father exhaled sharply. Brooke. Enough. Enough. That word had protected Victoria for years. I stepped back from the island. When did Mom change lawyers? Victoria didn't hesitate. 3 months ago. Why? She wanted someone with more estate experience. Linda Carver handled our family's estate for 20 years. Victoria's expression hardened for a fraction of a second. Linda was outdated. Outdated. After breakfast, Victoria left to handle a few things before the reading. I watched her car disappear down the driveway toward the marina. The house felt different without her voice filling it. I went out onto the back porch and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Linda Carver answered on the third ring. Mrs. Carver, it's Brooke Daniels. There was a pause. Brooke, I'm sorry for your loss. Why did my mother replace you? Another pause. Longer this time. She told me she needed a change. Linda said carefully. Did you believe her? Silence hummed through the line. Your mother called me one evening, Linda said finally. About a week before the transition. She sounded unsettled. Unsettled how? She said she felt rushed. My grip tightened on the porch railing. Rushed to do what? To sign an amendment to the Daniels Marina Trust. The words landed heavily. What kind of amendment? One that shifted primary trustee authority. To Victoria, Linda didn't answer directly. Your mother asked whether the restructuring could wait. I advised that significant asset collateralization should never be rushed. Collateralization. She mentioned the marina, I said. Yes. Did she sign it? She did, Linda replied. But I was no longer her counsel when the final version was filed. My pulse quickened. Did you think she wanted to? I thought she wanted more time, Linda said. And more oversight. Oversight. Will you be at the reading? I asked. Yes, she said. At your mother's request. After I hung up, I stood on the porch staring at the marsh beyond the dock. The tide was low, exposing mud and broken shells. The marina cranes stood still against the pale morning sky. Victoria hadn't just changed lawyers. She had changed the structure. And whatever that amendment did, she was certain it secured everything in her favor. By tomorrow morning, everything will be settled. The phrase no longer sounded confident. It sounded rehearsed. I checked my email. Whitmore and Hayes, estate review confirmation. Attached. Supplementary codicil. I didn't know what a codicil was, but I knew this much. If Victoria was so certain she had won, she wouldn't be warning people not to let me speak to the lawyer alone. Tomorrow wasn't just about reading a will. It was about whether my mother had truly signed away control, or whether she had left something behind to stop it. And if she had, Victoria had no idea what was about to be opened. The marina was quiet when I drove down just after sunrise. Fog hovered low over the water, turning the docks into faint silhouettes. Daniels Marina had always felt solid to me. Predictable. Generational. My grandfather built it from borrowed lumber and stubborn pride. My mother turned it into something respected along the Charleston coast. It wasn't just a business. It was our name. And now, apparently, it was collateral. I parked near the office and sat there for a moment, replaying Linda Carver's words in my head. Asset collateralization should never be rushed. Rushed. Victoria had said it was strategic, necessary, temporary. She had said everything was finalized months ago, like that was reassurance. I stepped out of the car and walked along the dock. A few early employees were prepping boats for the day. They nodded politely, unsure whether to say more. News traveled fast in Charleston. The slap at the Coffin had likely already been interpreted as sibling drama. No one knew it was about control. Back at the house, after Victoria left that morning, I had logged into the online probate portal using the estate access information Whitmore's office had provided. I told myself I was just confirming timelines. Instead, I found the trust amendment filing, filed 3 months before my mother's death, effective immediately upon signature. Primary trustee authority revised. I stared at the document header, my eyes moving over legal language I wasn't trained to parse but understood enough to fear. Primary trustee authority. If Victoria had been granted sole authority, she could make decisions about the marina without consulting anyone. I printed the amendment and drove straight to Linda Carver's office on Broad Street. Her office looked exactly as I remembered it from childhood. Dark wood shelves, leather chairs, framed degrees older than me. It smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish. She greeted me with the careful warmth of someone who had known my family long enough to understand what wasn't being said. "You brought it?" she said, nodding at the folder in my hand. "I found the amendment filing this morning." She adjusted her glasses and read quietly for a few minutes. The ticking clock on the wall grew louder the longer she stayed silent. "The timeline is tight," she said finally. "How tight?" "Your mother was hospitalized that week, correct?" "Yes." She would have been under significant medication. My throat tightened. "Are you saying she wasn't competent?" "I'm saying the circumstances required heightened caution," Linda replied evenly, "which is why I advised against urgency." She flipped to the signature page. "Does that look like her signature to you?" I asked. Linda didn't answer immediately. She studied the slant. "The pen pressure, the ink density. It resembles her signature," she said carefully. "But the stroke pressure is inconsistent with her previous filings." "Inconsistent how?" As if she paused. "Or hesitated." I swallowed. "What did the amendment change exactly?" Linda leaned back in her chair. "It revised trustee authority for the Daniels Marina Trust. It designated Victoria as primary trustee with discretionary power over restructuring and asset leverage." "Asset leverage," I repeated. "Yes." "Meaning loans?" "Yes." My chest felt tight. Would that include using the marina as collateral? If structured under the amendment? Yes. I stared at the window behind her desk. Sunlight cutting across the glass. "She mentioned a restructuring," I said slowly. "She said it was strategic." Linda folded her hands. "Your mother called me the week before this filing. She said she felt rushed. She said she wanted to wait." "Wait for what?" "For you to be present." The room seemed to tilt. "She asked for you specifically. She asked whether decisions could be delayed until both daughters were involved." "And what did you tell her?" "That they could. There was no immediate legal necessity." "Then why was it filed anyway?" Linda held my gaze. "Because I was no longer her counsel at the time of finalization." I left her office with copies of the amendment and a new weight in my chest. On the drive back toward the marina, I made another stop at the county public records office. If the marina had been leveraged, there would be documentation. There was a commercial loan filing, dated 6 weeks before my mother's death. Daniels Marina listed as secured property. Margaret Daniels listed as guarantor. The amount made my stomach drop. It wasn't a small liquidity line. It was substantial. Enough to risk foreclosure if payments lapsed. I leaned back in the hard plastic chair and read the repayment schedule. First payment due within 90 days. I counted backward. The due date was next month. I drove back to the house with copies of everything and went straight to my mother's old office. Her desk still held neatly stacked folders and a ceramic mug with pens she no longer used. I opened the laptop that had been returned to the house after her final hospital stay. It took a few attempts to access her email account. But eventually I found what I wasn't sure I was looking for. In the drafts folder, subject line, "I feel pressured." The message was incomplete. "Linda, I don't know if this is the right decision. Victoria says we need to move quickly. She says Brooke will complicate things. I feel rushed. I don't like signing something I don't fully understand." The draft ended there. No send date. No response. I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing. This wasn't just sibling rivalry. This wasn't just inheritance. This was risk. I opened the bottom drawer of her desk and remembered something else. Years ago, after a break-in at the Marina office, my mother had installed a small security recording unit in her home office. She said it made her feel safer. The compartment where it should have been was empty. The cords were gone. I stood slowly, my pulse pounding in my ears. Victoria had controlled access to the house during my mother's final weeks. She had changed lawyers. She had secured a trust amendment. She had leveraged the Marina. And she had slapped me in front of our mother's coffin the night before the will reading. It wasn't grief. It was strategy. My phone buzzed in my hand. Whitmore and Hayes, reminder. Estate review tomorrow. 9:00 a.m. Attached again was the supplementary codicil. I opened the attachment this time. The first page contained my mother's signature. The second page contained a clause I hadn't seen before. Dual authorization required for any asset leverage under Daniel's Marina Trust. Effective immediately upon death. I stared at the date. 6 weeks before she died. The same week she told me to let the paperwork speak. Victoria believed she had secured control. She had no idea my mother might have secured something else. Tomorrow wasn't about dividing assets. It was about determining which document held the truth. The conference room at Whitmore and Hayes was colder than I expected. The table was long and polished. The kind designed to make decisions feel formal and irreversible. A small tray of water glasses sat in the center. Legal folders were arranged with deliberate symmetry. Charleston sunlight filtered through tall windows. Too bright for a day that felt this heavy. Victoria arrived first. 10 minutes early. Wearing a cream blazer that softened nothing about her expression. She took the chair closest to the head of the table without asking. My father followed a step behind her, moving slower than I had ever seen him move. I took the seat across from her. Thomas Whitmore entered with a folder tucked under his arm. He was measured in everything he did. Calm, unhurried. A man who understood that rooms like this could fracture families. "Thank you for being here," he said, taking his seat at the head of the table. "We'll begin shortly." Linda Carver entered next. Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I wasn't aware she'd be attending," Victoria said lightly. "She is here at your mother's request," Whitmore replied. The room shifted. Victoria folded her hands neatly in front of her. Of course. Whitmore opened the main estate file first. The tone was procedural. He confirmed my mother's full name, date of death, and the validity of the original Daniels family trust. He outlined the primary assets, the house, investment accounts, personal property, and Daniels Marina. Victoria sat upright, composed, as if she had rehearsed this moment. "The house," Whitmore said, "is to be divided equally between Brooke Daniels and Victoria Daniels." Victoria gave a faint nod. "Personal property is to be allocated according to attached schedule." Another nod. Then Whitmore paused. "Before proceeding to the trust distribution, there is a supplementary codicil to review." Victoria smiled faintly. Mom always liked her dramatic letters. Whitmore did not return the smile. "This codicil was signed 6 weeks prior to Margaret Daniels' death," he said. "It amends specific provisions of the Daniels Marina Trust." I felt Victoria's attention sharpen across the table. Whitmore turned the folder toward us and read clearly. "Effective immediately upon my death. No trustee shall exercise unilateral authority over asset leverage, restructuring, or collateralization of Daniels Marina without dual authorization from both Brooke Daniels and Victoria Daniels." Silence dropped heavily between us. Victoria blinked once. "I'm sorry," she said. "That doesn't make sense," Whitmore continued without acknowledging her interruption. "This clause supersedes any prior amendment granting singular discretionary authority." My father's eyes moved slowly from Whitmore to Victoria. "That can't be correct," Victoria said, her voice tightening. "The amendment designated me primary trustee." "It did," Whitmore replied evenly. "While Margaret Daniels was alive." Victoria's posture stiffened. The codicil, Whitmore said, specifically addresses posthumous authority. Linda Carver leaned forward slightly. Margaret expressed concern regarding time-sensitive leverage decisions. Victoria's gaze snapped toward her. You weren't even her counsel anymore. I was consulted, Linda said calmly. Whitmore lifted another document from the folder. In addition, he said, Margaret Daniels requested that the rationale behind this codicil be read aloud. Victoria's expression shifted. Not panic? Not yet. Just calculation. Whitmore unfolded a handwritten letter. The room felt smaller. If you are hearing this, he began, it means I am no longer present to moderate my daughters directly. My mother's words filled the space in Whitmore's steady voice. I have felt increasing pressure in recent months to make financial decisions quickly. I do not believe important family assets should ever be rushed. Victoria's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. I love both my daughters. The letter continued. But I know their strengths and their flaws. Control is not the same as stewardship. The word hung there. Control. Whitmore kept reading. I want Daniels Marina protected from any decision made in haste or under stress. If either daughter attempts to leverage the marina without the other's consent, the action shall trigger automatic review by the court. Victoria stood abruptly. This is ridiculous, she said. Mom trusted me. She asked me to handle the restructuring. Whitmore remained seated. She did, he said, while she was alive. Victoria's breathing grew sharper. You're twisting this, she said. This was about efficiency. Whitmore set down the letter and reached for another folder. There is more, he said. The air in the room seemed to thin. As part of the codicil, Margaret Daniels requested documentation of the final advisory meetings be preserved. Victoria's face went still. Whitmore placed a small digital recorder on the table. The final consultation session between Margaret Daniels and Victoria Daniels was recorded at Margaret's request. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria stared at the device like it might disappear if she didn't acknowledge it. That's illegal, she said quickly. It was recorded with consent, Whitmore replied. He pressed play. The audio crackled softly before my mother's voice emerged. Thin. Tired. I don't want to sign this today. Victoria's voice followed. Controlled. Persuasive. We don't have time. Mom, if we delay, Brooke will complicate everything. My father inhaled sharply. Brooke doesn't need to be involved. Victoria continued on the recording. She'll slow this down. I want to wait. My mother said again. We can't afford to, Victoria replied. Whitmore stopped the recording before it continued further. The silence that followed was heavier than anything spoken. Victoria's face had drained of color. That was taken out of context, she said. She was confused. Linda's voice remained steady. Margaret was evaluated for cognitive capacity that same week. She was deemed competent. My father pushed his chair back slightly. Victoria, he said quietly. Why didn't you tell me about this? She looked at him, searching for alignment. For rescue? It was just business, she insisted. I was protecting the marina. By leveraging it, I asked. My voice even... Her eyes snapped to mine. You wouldn't understand what it takes to keep this family afloat. I held her gaze. I understand what it takes not to rush someone who's dying. Whitmore folded his hands. In light of the codicil and preserved documentation, he said, any existing commercial loan secured against Daniels Marina is now subject to dual authorization. Without Brooke Daniels's consent, refinancing or asset liquidation cannot proceed. Victoria's lips parted, then closed. You can't block me, she said. I'm not blocking you, I replied quietly. I'm protecting what Mom asked us to protect. For the first time since the slap, Victoria looked unsure, not embarrassed. Not remorseful. Uncertain. She had prepared for a will reading. She had not prepared for her own voice to be played back in a room with structure. The control she thought she had secured 3 months ago was unraveling in real time, and the meeting wasn't finished yet. Victoria's chair scraped sharply against the floor as she pushed back from the table. This is absurd, she said. Her voice thin now, stretched tight. You're presenting this like I forced her? Whitmore did not raise his voice. We are presenting documentation. There are missing pieces, Victoria insisted. You can't just play one recording and pretend that's the full story. Linda folded her hands calmly. The recording was submitted as part of the codicil package. It was sealed with Margaret's written request. Victoria laughed once, sharp and humorless. She was on medication. You know that... Whitmore nodded. Which is why, as Linda mentioned, her cognitive evaluation was included. He slid another sheet across the table. Certified Cognitive Capacity Assessment. Date stamped. Signed by her attending physician. My father stared at the paper like it might rearrange itself if he waited long enough. Victoria didn't sit back down. She stayed standing, one hand gripping the back of her chair. She trusted me, she said. But the certainty was fading. She trusted you while she was alive. Whitmore replied, The codicil addresses what happens after. Victoria turned toward my father. Dad, say something. He looked at her, and for the first time since the funeral, I saw confusion on his face instead of automatic defense. You told me everything was straightforward, he said quietly. You told me Brooke was overreacting. I was protecting us, she snapped. From what? He asked. Her eyes flicked toward me. From losing control of what we built. I leaned forward slightly. You leveraged the marina 6 weeks before Mom died. I said evenly. Did you tell Dad that? Victoria's silence was answer enough. My father's face drained of color. You put the marina up as collateral, he asked. It was a strategic liquidity move, she said quickly. Short term. For how much? He demanded. She hesitated. Whitmore answered instead, sliding the commercial loan document forward. The number sat there in black ink. My father stared at it for a long time. That's not short term, he said. It was manageable, Victoria replied. With the right restructuring. And if it wasn't? I asked. She didn't answer. Whitmore cleared his throat gently. Under the codicil, any refinancing must now be approved by both trustees. Victoria's breathing had become uneven. You're siding with her, she said to Whitmore. I'm enforcing your mother's instructions. The room felt heavier by the second. Victoria finally lowered herself back into her chair. She smoothed her blazer automatically, a reflex of control. You're acting like I committed a crime, she said. Linda met her gaze calmly. Margaret did not accuse you of a crime. She expressed concern about pressure. Victoria's jaw tightened. I was the one at every hospital appointment, she said. I was the one meeting bankers, handling payroll, dealing with vendors. Brooke was 3 hours away writing press releases. I felt the sting of that, but I didn't react. You were at every appointment, I said quietly. And you were at every signing. Her eyes flashed. I did what needed to be done. Even when she said she wanted to wait, I asked. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it. Whitmore folded the codicil back into the file. There is one final provision, he said. Victoria looked up sharply. In the event of dispute regarding trustee conduct, he continued. Margaret Daniels requested a temporary financial audit of Daniels Marina prior to any restructuring. My stomach tightened. An audit. Victoria's composure cracked for the first time. That's unnecessary, she said quickly. The books are clean. Whitmore's expression did not change. The request is mandatory under the codicil. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the water glass in front of her. You're humiliating me, she said. No, I replied softly. You did that yesterday. The words settled between us. She looked at me then. Really looked at me. As if seeing me without the filter she had always applied. You think you've won, she whispered. I think Mom prepared, I said. Whitmore closed the main estate file. With respect to property distribution, he said, the residence is to be transferred into joint ownership immediately. The marina remains under trust control, subject to dual authorization and audit review. Victoria leaned back in her chair slowly. And if I refuse to cooperate? She asked. Whitmore's answer was simple. The court will enforce compliance. Silence returned to the room. But it was different now. Not brittle. Not explosive. Structured. My father sat with his hands clasped tightly together. Why didn't you tell me about the loan? He asked Victoria. She didn't look at him. I didn't want to worry you, she said. He exhaled shakily. You risked everything without telling me. It was calculated, she insisted weakly. Based on whose consent? He asked. She didn't answer. The meeting adjourned shortly after. Papers were signed. Dates for the audit were set. Formal notices prepared. Victoria stood abruptly again. This isn't over, she said. Whitmore met her gaze steadily. No. It isn't. Outside the building, the Charleston air felt humid and close. The city moved around us as if nothing had shifted. Victoria walked ahead toward her car without looking back. My father remained beside me on the sidewalk. I didn't know, he said quietly. I know, I replied. He looked older than he had yesterday. I should have, he added. I didn't respond. Victoria reached her car and stopped. She turned once, her expression unreadable. For years, she had controlled the narrative, the finances, the access, the perception. Now the structure no longer bent toward her. She got into her car and drove away. My phone buzzed in my hand. Whitmore. Audit process initiated. Expect contact within 72 hours. I stared at the message, then slipped the phone into my bag. The slap at the coffin had been about dominance. The recording had been about exposure. But the audit, that was about consequences. And for the first time, I realized something important. This wasn't about dividing what our mother left behind. It was about uncovering what had already been done. And if Victoria had leveraged more than the marina, the next few weeks were going to reveal far more than she ever intended. The auditors arrived on Thursday morning. 2 men and 1 woman in navy suits, carrying slim briefcases and neutral expressions. They introduced themselves politely, showed credentials, and requested access to the marina's financial records for the past 12 months. Victoria met them at the dock office before I could get there. I watched from my car as she stood with her arms crossed. Posture tight, chin lifted just enough to signal irritation without open hostility. She had always been good at optics. By the time I stepped inside the office, the air already felt charged. We'll need access to digital accounting logs, loan agreements, and vendor contracts, the lead auditor said calmly. Victoria forced a thin smile. Of course. Transparency has never been an issue. I didn't comment. The marina office smelled faintly of salt water and printer ink. Framed photographs of ribbon cuttings and fishing tournaments lined the walls. My grandfather stood in most of them, grinning under a sun-faded cap. This place had never been reckless. Victoria logged into the accounting system with deliberate keystrokes. The auditors worked quietly, efficient and methodical. For the first hour, nothing seemed out of place. Routine payroll, fuel contracts, dock maintenance invoices. Then the woman auditor asked a question. Can you clarify this vendor payment? She turned the monitor slightly so we could see. Harbor Development Consulting. Monthly retainer. Significant amount. Victoria's shoulders stiffened. That's a strategic advisory firm, she said. They guided the restructuring. For the marina? The auditor asked. Yes. The auditor scrolled further down. There are also transfers from the Marina Trust account to a personal investment LLC, she said. Victoria inhaled sharply. That's related to expansion planning. Expansion where? I asked. Victoria shot me a warning look. It was exploratory, she said. We were considering acquiring a secondary property, using trust funds, the auditor asked evenly. Temporarily. The room felt smaller. The lead auditor adjusted his glasses. Under the trust amendment filed prior to Margaret Daniels' death, trustee authority permitted discretionary leverage. However, posthumous authority requires dual authorization. He looked at me briefly. These transfers occurred both before and after the date of death. Victoria's face drained of color. "That's not accurate," she said quickly. The post-death transfer was a timing issue. The auditor pointed to the timestamp. 2 weeks after my mother's funeral. A substantial transfer. From the Marina Trust account. Into Harbor Development Consulting. "Was this approved by both trustees?" the auditor asked. Victoria's jaw tightened. "It was in motion already." "That was not the question," he replied. She didn't answer. The sound of gulls outside cut through the silence. I felt something inside me steady rather than panic. Not triumph. Not anger. Clarity. "You moved funds after Mom died," I said quietly. Victoria finally turned toward me. "I was protecting the investment." "With whose permission?" She didn't speak. The auditors continued working. By midday, their stack of printed reports had grown thick. My father arrived just after lunch. Called in by one of the auditors at Whitmore's request, he walked into the office slowly, as if bracing himself. "What's happening?" he asked. The lead auditor gestured toward the desk. "We're reviewing several transactions that appear inconsistent with the codicil provisions." My father looked at Victoria. "Did you move money after the funeral?" She swallowed. "It was operational." "From the trust?" He pressed. "Yes." "Without Brooke's authorization?" Silence. The answer didn't need to be spoken. My father sank into the chair behind the desk. Victoria's voice rose slightly. "You're acting like I stole something." "It was reinvestment." "In whose name?" I asked. The woman auditor slid a document across the desk. "Harbor Development Consulting, LLC. Managing member. Victoria Daniels." The room went still. "It was temporary," Victoria said weakly. "I plan to roll it back once the expansion closed." "Which expansion?" I asked. She didn't respond. The lead auditor closed his folder. "We will need to submit these findings to the court," he said. "This may constitute breach of fiduciary duty." Victoria flinched at the word. "Breach." "It was never my intention," she began. "Intent does not override trust structure," the auditor replied. My father rubbed his temples. "How much?" he asked quietly. The auditor named the figure. My father closed his eyes. "That's almost the first loan payment," he whispered. Victoria's composure shattered. "I was trying to save us," she snapped. "The marina's margins have been shrinking for years. Mom didn't understand modern scaling. Brooke doesn't understand business at all." "I understand consent," I said. Her eyes burned into mine. "You would have said no," she said. "Yes," I replied. That was the truth she had been working around for months. By late afternoon, the auditors packed their materials. "You will receive a formal report within 5 business days," the lead auditor said. They left without drama. The dock office felt hollow once they were gone. Victoria stood motionless beside the desk. "This is going to ruin everything," she said. "No," I answered quietly. Moving the money did that. She laughed bitterly. "You think this makes you righteous?" "I think it makes Mom's caution justified." She looked at me like she didn't recognize me. For years, she had framed me as emotional, reactionary, naive. Now I was the one standing still. "You could stop this," she said. "How?" "By agreeing to ratify the transfer retroactively." The request hung in the air. "Sign off," she continued. "We tell the court it was administrative timing. And if I don't?" Her voice dropped. "Then it becomes litigation." I held her gaze. "It already is." She looked away first. Outside, the tide was coming back in, water slowly covering the exposed mud from earlier in the week. The marina still stood, but the illusion that Victoria had been safeguarding it alone was gone. And for the first time, I realized something deeper than anger. She hadn't slapped me at the Coffin because I embarrassed her. She slapped me because she thought I wouldn't fight. She believed I would choose peace over structure. She was wrong, and the court was about to make that clear in writing. The court notice arrived the following Tuesday. Certified mail, formal language. A hearing scheduled within 30 days to address potential breach of fiduciary duty and unauthorized posthumous transfers from the Daniels Marina Trust. Victoria called me within an hour. "You're really going through with this," she said. "I didn't initiate the audit," I replied. "You could stop it." "No." There was a long silence on the line. "You're going to destroy the marina," she said finally. "I'm trying to prevent that." She hung up. The hearing took place in a modest Charleston courtroom with worn wooden benches and high ceilings that carried every whisper. It wasn't dramatic. No television cameras. No raised voices. Just structure. Victoria sat at the defense table with a newly retained attorney, a man with sharp features and a reputation for aggressive negotiation. She looked polished, controlled, almost defiant. My father sat behind her, not beside her. Whitmore represented the trust. Linda Carver was present as a witness to prior advisory concerns. When the judge entered, the room fell into disciplined quiet. The audit findings were presented methodically. Commercial loan secured against Daniels Marina, trust amendment granting discretionary authority during Margaret Daniels' lifetime, posthumous codicil requiring dual authorization, documented transfer of funds after date of death. Funds moved into Harbor Development Consulting, LLC. Managing member, Victoria Daniels. There was no shouting, no theatrical accusations. Just paper. Victoria's attorney argued that the transfer had been part of a pre-existing business strategy and that timing irregularities were administrative, not malicious. The judge listened without interruption. Then he asked a simple question. Was dual authorization obtained after the date of death? Victoria's attorney hesitated. "No, Your Honor." Was Brooke Daniels notified of the transfer? "No." The judge nodded slowly. "Intent may be debated," he said. "But fiduciary duty is not optional." Victoria stared straight ahead, jaw tight. The ruling was not explosive. It was precise. The unauthorized posthumous transfer was to be reversed immediately. Harbor Development Consulting, LLC, required to return funds to the Daniels Marina Trust within 10 business days. Victoria temporarily suspended from unilateral trustee authority pending compliance. Ongoing oversight mandated for a period of 12 months. Failure to comply would trigger further legal action. There was no gasp. No dramatic collapse. Just the steady sound of a gavel. Outside the courthouse, Charleston moved as it always did. Tourists walked past unaware. Carriages rolled by. The humidity clung to everything. Victoria stood on the courthouse steps for a moment, staring ahead. "You did this," she said without looking at me. "No," I replied quietly. "The paperwork did?" She let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "You always needed someone else to fight for you." "My mother did," I said. That landed, for a split second. Something flickered across her face. Not anger. Recognition. Then it was gone. My father approached slowly. "I should have asked more questions," he said. Victoria didn't respond. He turned to me. "I trusted her because she handled everything," he continued. "I didn't realize handling meant hiding." "I know," I said. Victoria's composure finally cracked, not in tears, but in volume. "I was trying to modernize it," she snapped. "The marina isn't what it was 20 years ago. We needed leverage. You needed control," I said. She shook her head. "You've always seen the world in absolutes." "No," I answered. "I've just learned to read contracts." The following week, the funds were returned to the trust. Harbor Development Consulting, LLC was dissolved quietly. The marina's loan was renegotiated under joint authorization, this time with full transparency and a conservative repayment schedule. No one applauded. No one celebrated. Victoria stopped attending weekly operations meetings. She delegated through her attorney. Communication between us shifted entirely to formal channels. My father began coming to the marina more often. Not to command. To observe. One evening, as the sun set over the dock, he stood beside me watching the tide roll in. "She thought speed meant strength," he said. She thought silence meant consent, I replied. He nodded slowly. I'm sorry I didn't step in sooner. I'm not asking for apologies. I said, I'm asking for structure. He gave a faint, weary smile. You sound like your mother. That didn't feel like a burden. It felt like alignment. Victoria never admitted wrongdoing. She complied with the court order, signed the necessary reversals, and maintained public composure within the church and community. But something fundamental had shifted. People talk in small towns. Not loudly, but thoroughly. The story that traveled wasn't about a jealous sister contesting a will. It was about a trust structure enforced. About a Marina nearly leveraged too aggressively. About oversight. Victoria's image as the unchallenged steward of the Daniels name softened. Not destroyed. Just recalibrated. One night, weeks after the hearing, she showed up at the Marina unannounced. We were the only two in the office. She didn't sit. I never wanted to lose it, she said. I know. I thought you'd stand in the way. I did. She exhaled slowly. You could have humiliated me more. I didn't need to. Silence stretched between us. You always thought I was trying to replace you, she said. I thought you were trying to control me. She didn't argue. For the first time in our lives, there was no audience, no church, no board members, no father mediating. Just two daughters standing inside a business their mother had protected in her final weeks. You could have told me, I said. You would have said no. Yes? She nodded faintly, almost acknowledging the symmetry. That's why I didn't. The Marina lights flickered on automatically as dusk settled. For years, Victoria believed decisiveness was strength. Now she understood that structure could be stronger. The court order didn't just reverse a transfer. It reversed a pattern. And for the first time since the slap in the chapel, I felt something beyond defense. I felt steady. Not because she had fallen, but because the ground beneath us no longer shifted without warning. The first morning I unlocked the Marina office alone, the air felt different. Not lighter. Not triumphant. Clear. The tide was low, and the docks creaked softly under the weight of early fishing boats heading out before sunrise. I stood inside the office for a long moment before turning on the lights, letting the quiet settle into something steady instead of tense. My mother's framed photograph still hung on the wall behind the desk. She was laughing in it, wind in her hair, one hand shielding her eyes from the sun. For weeks, I had replayed the sound of that slap in the chapel, the sharp crack against my cheek, the humiliation, the way everyone had frozen. But now, when I thought about that moment, it felt less like an attack and more like a reveal. Victoria hadn't slapped me because I embarrassed her. She slapped me because she believed I would stay silent. She believed I would protect peace over structure. She was wrong. The court oversight lasted 12 months. During that time, every major financial decision required joint signatures and documented review. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fast. But it was safe. The loan was renegotiated under conservative terms. Vendor contracts were reviewed line by line. Harbor Development Consulting disappeared from our paperwork entirely. Victoria remained involved, but differently, less dominant, more careful. She stopped speaking for both of us in public meetings. She stopped referring to the Marina as hers. It became ours again. My father came to the dock most mornings now, coffee in hand, standing near the same piling my grandfather used to lean against. One afternoon, as we watched a charter boat pull away, he spoke quietly. She knew you wouldn't let her cut corners. Mom? He nodded. She didn't write that codicil to punish Victoria, he said. She wrote it to protect the Marina from speed. I thought about the hospital room, her thin fingers squeezing mine. Let the paperwork speak. She saw what was happening, I said. She always did. Victoria and I never had a dramatic reconciliation. There was no tearful apology, no embrace in the sunset. What we had instead was something quieter. Boundaries. We communicate through scheduled meetings and documented emails. We disagree, but we document. We negotiate, But we do it with witnesses when necessary. It's not warm, but it's honest. One Sunday, several months after the hearing, I found myself back in the same church where she slapped me. A different service. A different reason. Victoria sat 3 pews ahead of me. She didn't turn around, and I didn't look away. The slap had been meant to establish dominance. Instead, it exposed desperation. People in small communities don't forget moments like that. But they also don't forget outcomes. The narrative shifted slowly. Not to Brooke destroyed her sister, but to Margaret protected her business. That distinction mattered. I moved back into the house full-time 6 months later. Not because of the inheritance, because it felt like stewardship. I kept my mother's armchair by the window where she used to read financial reports at night. I kept the small wooden box in her desk drawer where she stored handwritten notes and dock repair receipts. I did not keep resentment. That was heavier than any loan. The day the court oversight officially ended, Whitmore sent a final letter confirming compliance and reinstatement of standard trustee authority under the codicil terms. Victoria and I signed the acknowledgement together. No ceremony, just signatures. As we left the office, she paused near the door. "You know," she said, not meeting my eyes, "I thought control was the only way to keep things from falling apart." "And now?" I asked. She hesitated. "Now I think maybe I was afraid of losing relevance." The honesty surprised me. "You're not irrelevant," I said. "You just don't get to decide alone." She gave a faint nod. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was clarity. The marina still stands. The docks still creak at low tide. Tourists still rent boats on summer afternoons. And every time I sign a document, I remember the way my mother prepared. Not with anger. Not with confrontation. With structure. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: silence is not peace. Silence is permission. And sometimes the strongest response to betrayal isn't striking back. It's letting the truth be read aloud in a room where no one can interrupt it. If you've ever been told you were too emotional for asking questions, or too difficult for insisting on fairness, you're not alone. Many families mistake control for strength. Many women are taught to stay quiet to keep the harmony. But harmony built on silence always cracks eventually. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to choose structure over peace? Boundaries over approval? Share your experience in the comments. And if you believe in justice that comes through preparation, not revenge, stay with us. There's another story waiting. And this time, no one gets to rewrite it. This story is fictionalized for dramatic effect.